a solution, each step of their process influencing the next based on the data they were collecting. And they report on that 4-year process in this article. So first, they formed a literacy committee and established the key objectives they wanted to address, including to develop and articulate a school-wide vision for ensuring all students acquire the literacy skills necessary for academic and future success, develop and refine a consistent set of literacy strategies and practices used across their senior school and then their junior school, to provide staff with relevant and practical professional development and support to execute these strategies competently to the point that they become embedded and sustainable. And then the fourth objective was to refine the processes used to track the progress of students and the sharing of that information for instructional purposes. So they did a survey of the students in years 7 to 9, which are those earlier secondary years and when students move from having library lessons and more opportunities for sustained silent reading in their drop everything and read program, so their reader program, to having a bit less time for those kinds of opportunities and more curriculum constraints as well. So in that survey, they found low levels of reading for engagement with these students and decided to implement a sustained silent reading time of 15 minutes each day for both students and staff. After doing this for a bit, they reevaluated and realized that 15 minutes was not enough time to develop the reading habits and engagement that they were trying to build. So they undertook an even bigger research project, which actually involved Margaret, the scholar I was talking about earlier, as a research mentor. They did extensive research in that project, changed their reading time to 80 minutes per week, which depending on the student's timetable could be different amount of time per day, but total 80 minutes per week. And they figured out that that equaled about 1 adult novel per month. So students were reading about 8 novels a year, at least. And they also added weekly book talks from students to support the promotion of reading and to model reading behaviors. So this slide shows a bit of their process here, a visual of that, what that whole 4-year process looked like. And it's still progressing. There's more details in this article here, but they saw increased reading engagement across the years and more support from the wider community, including staff and parent carers. I think their example is a really good lesson that these things take time. So they started in 2017, but now here in 2021, they're reporting that they are achieving the outcomes and the objectives that they initially set forth. So yes, persistence and consistency in building a school-wide reading culture is really key. But then even thinking a bit broader, so partnering with the local public library is a great way to build a community-wide reading culture. And we see this a lot with summer holiday reading programs, working to prevent that summer slide or summer slump that many kids actually regress in their literacy skills during the summer when they're not in school and possibly not reading quite as much. Now in Australia, we have a year-round school calendar, so the summer holidays are a bit shorter, usually about 6 weeks, depending on the school. But based on my experiences when teaching in the US, most of the schools there don't run on such a calendar and run more of a kind of September to May, June calendar. So the summer holidays can be much longer for the kids and thus could be more detrimental to their literacy skills as well with that extra time. But in Australia, an example of such a summer reading program happens in Melbourne, Victoria, in the Yarra Plenty Library with their big summer reading program. Now, while it might seem like an obvious collaboration of school libraries working with public libraries, and that is one of those key elements that Margaret Mason noted, collaborative efforts as key in building reading cultures. Some of my research colleagues at CSU, we've been working on a project investigating the relationships between public and school libraries. I'm not seeing much happening there, much being reported as happening. However, what is happening are these summer reading programs. So some of our survey respondents noted that they have a strong connection with their school or public library in supporting summer reading for youth in the community. So that's a great a great way to get the whole community reading and to really monitor or, model those reading habits across the board. But now saying that, this program at Yarra Planning does have some intrinsic awards, and that can be quite a concern in some of those programs which are meant to be developing a school-wide reading culture. So reward-based programs that work to promote reading, like the Accelerated Reader Program. And now I can remember when I was a kid, my middle school had just started this program, and I became obsessed with getting the points. I was a good reader, and my family, as I said, coming from a family of teachers, you can imagine that's something really pushed in our home. I was a good reader, and I found it really easy to take those 10-question multiple choice summary tests of the book. So every year my goal was to be able to get 200 points, which meant I could go to an amusement park for the day and miss the whole school day. They also had an ice cream sundae party every quarter if you got 30 points. So ice cream, amusement parks, big motivators, big extrinsic motivators for me to read. And I remember reading every Nancy Drew book on the shelf because those were really easy to read for me, and they were worth 5 points. So I even had a whole strategy about this. Now, I'm not sure that this program spurred on a love of reading for myself, but it really did make me read. Now, did I read in high school when that program stopped and I started doing sports and other extracurricular activities? No, I just didn't have the time to read anymore, or that extrinsic motivator. So, yeah, the verdict's still out on how these rewards-based programs do support reading. Now, Tishner, Ebner, Aspiranti, Klingbeil, and Fedewa did a meta-analysis study of 44 studies looking at the effectiveness of the Accelerated Reader Program. And they actually had similar findings that the program only had moderate to marginally positive effects on reading outcomes for young readers. So while the rewards-based programs can seem like a great way to develop that school-wide reading culture, the intrinsic bits are a bit challenging. Okay, the next way we can promote reading in school libraries is related to that first one of developing a reading culture, but it's about offering opportunities to read. This is important because, as we know, not all kids like reading or are initially good at it. So they might not even want to do it if they know that it's good for them because the adults say it's good for them. They still might want to do it. But at the same time, we know that the more we practice something, the better we get at it. And the same goes for reading. Stanovich noted this in relation to the Matthew effect, which is a theory that states the better you are at something, the more inclined you are to do it and to practice it. So the better then you continue to get at it. And the reverse could be said. So if a student is not good at reading, they might not want to do it at all, and thus they don't get better at it at all, while their reading peers continue to improve and improve. So this is why establishing those habits and offering opportunities to read is so important. Yes, and then going along with that idea is the secondary level. So we often see a lot of these reading programs at the primary school level, but then when we get to secondary, there's often a drop in reading for pleasure by students at this age. As I noted in my last slide about the Accelerated Reader Program, this was an issue for myself, even though I was a really avid reader in middle school. Secondary students have more pressure to study, more extracurricular activities, teachers do as well. So they don't have time to read for pleasure that primary students might have. But as we saw in the example from the Greenwood School in the previous slides with the Just Read program, we need to make the time for reading and offer those opportunities to read. So Greenwood is a great example of really making a dedicated effort to do that across these 4 years, and they're finally seeing that progress. And there's so many amazing young adult authors and titles out there. So I'm on the Young Adult Book Award Committee for the International Literary Association, which celebrates first-time authors. And I was lucky to read 106 titles by new young adult authors over the past summer. And this is a 2-year term, so I'll get to do that again this year, this summer. The diversity of topics and genres and settings was just really incredible. And I truly believe that we can find relevant books for our readers out there. Those mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors, which we'll talk about later when we talk about collections. Okay, next, modeling good reading habits. So as an adult to students. So think about these first 2 questions. When do students see you reading? Of course, you are likely working and running a busy school library most of the time when they're seeing you. But is there time during the day where they could possibly see you reading? Maybe during lunch or quieter times in the day in the library? Do any library lessons involve reading for pleasure or offer those opportunities for everyone to read? I think this is especially important for boys to see men reading and modeling good reading habits so they don't think learning and reading are feminine acts and things girls do, especially considering the presence of women as educators in especially primary schools. When do you talk to your students about what they are reading or what you are reading? Do you ask them how they find books they like to read or share the challenges you have in finding books that you like to read? I think it's important to share when you don't like books or had an unsuccessful book choice. Because I think sometimes kids tend to think the librarian likes to read everything and has read everything in the library, which of course is not true. So talking about it with them so they get that even an adult like you who knows how to find good books makes bad choices sometimes. In many ways, it's a metacognitive act and learning how to learn and what ways work best for you as an individual to learn. So I think talking openly about these issues is good and particularly important at school if reading is not something that students might be seeing happening at home or is not something very common at home. There's lots of research out there about home libraries and the education of parents and carers and how they can impact students' academic outcomes, but this is really intimately related to socioeconomic class. And likely if a family is struggling to pay bills and buy food, buying books to create a home library may be out of the question. So this really shows an even greater need for school libraries and for our collections. Further, Lin et al. Studied the connections between reading engagement and comprehension and found that students who were labeled as struggling readers lacked the skills to find books that interested them and could support their reading. So again, that makes it even more important to have those open discussions about finding and selecting books. As my awesome colleague and PhD student Crystal Gagnon-Spriggs found in her master's research of what motivates kids to read, she found that surprised teacher librarians too. So having access to teacher librarians that are passionate about books and having the assistance in finding the right book from a teacher librarian is an important role in why students chose to read. Now, the research previously noted by Margaret and Mason on developing a reading culture supports this as well. So as I previously said, they looked at how school leadership affects the development and life of a school-wide reading culture. And definitely things determined at that level like budget and resourcing are a key factor. But another interesting finding that emerged from their work was that school leaders who identified themselves or were viewed by others in the school as, quote, readers, were more supportive and more influential in building a school-wide reading culture in practice. This finding is really intriguing to me because I think that it shows how the young readers of today can become the leaders in reading of tomorrow through modeling those good reading habits. Okay, and then finally, one of the best ways that we can promote reading is by sharing the books. So building engaging and diverse collections so that the students are bound to find something they like that speaks to them. Now this will look different for every school and every library because we're all serving different communities. What is appropriate for one might not work in another. I'm a firm advocate against censorship, but I understand that selection differs across schools. In today's world, there's a lot of talk about banning books and barring access to certain topics and genre, and I think it is crucial to give youth the agency and opportunity to make their own decisions about what they want to read. Emily Stiles' quote from 1988 about books being mirrors and windows, and then reading scenes Bishop adding in sliding glass doors, is a great way to think about the collection. Can each child in your school go to the shelves and find a mirror in a book, something that they can relate to, some element of the story that is familiar? Can they also find mirrors in their books where they can look into a new world or learn something new about other people or live vicariously through the pages of the book? And sliding glass doors. Can they find books that they can really engage with and become fully immersed in a story or experience? These are the pleasures of gaining insight and sharing experiences that we get from reading, and a diverse collection can support these too. Now, I'm not exactly sure who coined the term the it book. I had heard once it was Gary Paulson, but I've not been able to find the exact reference. I did find a video of him talking about reading as a kid on the Books A Million YouTube channel, which I popped into my reference list. You can check that out there. And he talked about how a public librarian got him into reading, even though he was, quote, an awful student and, quote, a poor reader. But this librarian shared books with him that inspired him and got him to not only read, but to become an influential youth author. And I think that is a big role for us as promoters of reading. So finding that it book for a kid, which can really then turn them into a reader and lead into them finding the author that they love, whether it's Gary Paulson or someone similar, or the genre. Maybe they discover they're really interested in fantasy and then read every fantasy book in the library. So I think if we can connect kids to those books, authors, genres, that's when they really start to identify as readers. And that's really what the teacher librarian can do. A lot of that research, like what Crystal did and what Margaret Murray is doing, is showing that. Then building engaging and diverse collections is one way to ensure that we can do that. So I'm talking diverse in terms of topics and genres, but also in terms of formats, so having graphic novels, ebooks even, although the research again is showing that kids want the print books, adults want it too, they want to read in print. But having ebooks available just in case. Asking what the kids want to read is another great way to ensure the collection is relevant titles for them. So setting up a student advisory committee like we saw with the Just Read program, or even a simple suggestion box is a really easy way to get at that. Okay, now if you're interested in what's happening in Australia, here are some of our national and state journals, which have some great information. Scan is free and published from the Department of Education in New South Wales, so that's online and it's just linked in my presentation here, which I will share. Synergy is another really great journal from the School Library Association of Victoria, and their issues are free as well, except the most recent one, which is only for members, but you only need a few months to get past before that one becomes available too. And they also published this ebook here, Building a Library Reading Culture in 2021, which is a compilation of a selection of articles from the journal that relate to building a library reading culture. So really relevant to our topic here. And then Access, this one in the top right, is from our National School Library Association, ASLA. And it isn't open access, but if you're interested in what ASLA is doing, that's another resource for you. And then of course, global organizations. So these are some of the global organizations that I'm a part of that promote reading across borders. The International Literacy Association, the International Association of School Librarianship, and the International Board on Books for Young People. So they do a lot of things to support literacy and sharing books and cultures. So if you're interested in more on this topic, I recommend seeing what they have to offer and potentially joining and attending their professional development sessions and conferences, which are always really great. And lastly, some international scholars, in addition to the references in my reference slide, which I have these in my last slide. So these are some really good ones from Stephen Krashen. His work is really classic on, just that, the power of reading. And his book should really be in every teacher librarian's and every principal's professional bookshelf. And Margaret Murray, who I mentioned earlier, she has a new book out this year, which is very relevant to our topic here, Creating an Australian School Literacy Policy. And it would definitely be transferable in other contexts outside of Australia. So this one is research-based, and so just a really great resource for those of us in teacher librarianship. Hi again, Sila. Thank you so much for having me and listening to me go on about promoting reading in school libraries. It's just such an important topic for me, and I know since you have made it through to the end of my presentation, that it must be a really important topic for you. So I wish you the best of luck and stay strong in your own journeys to creating and developing a reading culture in your school. And just a big thank you to some of my colleagues here, Liz Daraway, Kay Adoni, Mary Carroll, and Crystal Gavin-Spriggs, for sharing some of their ideas and topics as researchers and practitioners on this topic of promoting reading, something we all think is really important. So I will share my references as well, but I've just highlighted some of the ones I think are really important here and good ones that you can use to impact your own practice. Thank you so much.